Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our work session of Tuesday, April 19th. Not a public meeting, but a work session where, again, even though we're in the fancy room, we sit and just talk about issues impacting the town as a workshop session. But first, before we get into that, we are pleased to have, first, actually, can I have a motion to open the work session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we are pleased to have the Chappaqua Volunteer Ambulance Corps here with us today to say hello and tell us a little bit about what you do. Come on up.
Right. We have three people. I'm Kate Clough. I'd be much happier without that.
Yes. Is it on? Okay.
Is this on? I'm Kate Clough, captain of Chappaqua Volunteer Ambulance Corps, and this is Mark Hirschfield, our first lieutenant, and one of our new members, Peter Spiro, who's starting to learn to drive the ambulance. I wanted to talk about local EMS and the effects of the pandemic on our membership. Most towns in Westchester have an ambulance service with EMTs, and that means that's basic life support. There are also paramedics, which are a higher level of care, and they're advanced life support, which Mark will talk about a bit. So when you hear VAC, that means Volunteer Ambulance Corps, so they're all volunteers, like us. At the beginning of the pandemic, we have about maybe 50 or 60 people who are really active, and about 3/4 of them stopped riding at the beginning of the pandemic for any number of personal reasons. Many of them have come back since then to riding, but a lot of people are feeling rusty and they're not comfortable putting in the hours they used to. It's like, everybody who's quitting their jobs, they've decided, I don't need to live here. So, more recently, people have all moved away because they realize they don't have to live in this tax district. So they take advantage of the high housing prices and move further away. So those are people.
Other wonderful reasons for living here.
Absolutely. But those are people we lost for good. So at this point, the people who have been riding are getting really burned out. And this is happening not just in our district, but all around the country, whether volunteer or even paid. When a town doesn't have a full crew to respond to a 911 call, dispatch calls for mutual aid. This means that they page a neighboring ambulance corps to cover the call in district. But because this is happening everywhere, there is a domino effect, and it just puts pressure on the entire system. So you may have read one of the articles talking about mutual aid in the Journal News. Did anybody see that?
Yeah.
We were mentioned. I honestly don't get the Journal News, so I didn't read it. But I heard that it said that we have one of the highest percentage increases in mutual aid. Part of this is because we didn't used to ask for a lot of mutual aid, so the increase was more dramatic. There are other VACs that ask for a lot of have always asked for a lot of mutual aid, so the increase wasn't as noticeable. So we all hope this situation is temporary. In Chappaqua, we've had a lot of meetings with other ambulance agencies to try and figure out some solutions. And of course, the best solution is for all of us to recruit new people to fill our gaps. But as you can imagine, it was very hard to recruit during COVID. So we're always on the lookout for incentives to draw new people. We had a meeting with Jill to talk about possibilities for incentives to help us with recruiting. One thing about recruiting, we had spoken to, I think you, about the lawn signs, because other VACs have said that they've had success with those. And I know we have issues with the town, with the signs, right?
We're working on it.
Okay. So we would be interested in knowing if we can do that. Are you talking about that tonight?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. One example of an incentive program, the county just rolled out a new program to provide tuition reimbursement and help with student loan repayment for EMS and fire. So we really appreciate your support. And does anybody have any questions before Mark is going to talk more about the finance side of things.
So what is you said 3/4 stop riding, but what is the total number right now?
I can't tell you that, but we have a lot of people on the books that really haven't come back to riding. So I would say there's probably 50 or 60 who are riding. But so some of them are EMTs, some are drivers, and some are aiding and just start. So Peter is a new member, and he is learning to drive for us. So when we say a full crew, we have to have a driver and an EMT. Having youth corps or adult aiders is extremely helpful, especially if we have to lift somebody. But like overnight, I'm going to be on call overnight with just an EMT. So, but I can get you the number, Chris. If you
Yeah,
want.
no, I'm just curious what optimal number would be, what the optimal number would be.
The optimal number would be a number of people who are really dedicated and want to do this all the time.
Got it.
And there are some of those, but
Okay.
not enough.
So, when Kate and Rob Deary and Mark and I sat down and talked about CVAC, one of the things that dawned on us was that with the turnover in our community and the influx of new people, a lot of them coming from New York City, they dial 911, they call for an ambulance, and CVAC shows up. They are professional. They look professional, they drive up in a professional ambulance. No one would know that they're volunteers as opposed to fully paid ambulance, which was servicing them when they were in New York City. And so I think part of the challenge is, how do we tap this new influx of residents and, try to get some percentage of them to step up and, experience and love the whole idea of volunteering for neighbors to enrich your community. Because there's no way that they would know, and there's no tell. Their ambulance is fully, outfitted, they come fully outfitted. No one would know that this is a group of dedicated, trained neighbors that are volunteering their time. So how do we try to gap that education void for them? And how do we get the word out?
We do. We attend Community Day and the Strawberry Festival. We do staff a lot of these events, the 10K and lots of different things, the football games. But it just isn't enough. So I really don't know.
Maybe we put something in the town newsletter.
There is something at the bottom of the
Yeah, I think
website.
we have to move it up front. We've
there
got an
might-
electronic sign, even with the sign ordinance, we still have an electronic sign. We still have banners, we still have triangle signs. In the past, we have, extended a no charge to CVAC because they do provide such an invaluable service to us. And it's a service that the town would have to provide, whether we have volunteers or we don't have volunteers.
Right.
We have to provide this.
Yeah, right now it's not an essential service. So the
Well-
towns are not obligated to make sure it's an effective service, right?
I don't think anyone in our town would tolerate calling 911, asking for an ambulance, and having us say to them, "Oh, sorry, not
Well, I
today."
think they don't know because it goes to mutual aid. If we don't have a
Right.
crew on, or if, say, Pleasantville needed mutual aid, so we went to cover them,
Right.
and then there's a call here, we have to call for so somebody shows up, and they're not really paying attention to what the logo is.
Right, actually, the article was about, not sometimes nobody shows up, and that's actually what the article was about. I'll share it with you.
Oh, okay.
So you mentioned going to football games. I'm thinking that the younger families have, the newer families have younger kids. So now that it's spring, ASO is out, hopefully, and, Little League, baseball, softball. So maybe going to those with the younger kids
Sure.
might help to educate
Sure, I mean,
the younger
at those kinds of
parents.
things, like Big Truck Day and stuff, it's really nice and it's fun for the little kids, but I don't think we've ever gotten any volunteers through there. I mean, we chat up the parents, but, part of the problem is that we don't have enough people to do these recruiting events, so we're working on that.
Do you hand things out to them, just information so that they could take
I
home?
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Right.
You want-
Jill, maybe you know this, but, geez, wow, that's loud. Is there a difference in scope between the issues CVAC's having and the issues the fire departments are having? Getting volunteers, keeping volunteers? Because I know just from discussing that with folks in the fire department that they're having similar issues getting people
They
to do it.
are. There happens to be a particular brain drain when it comes to EMTs. They are just burnt out, like our nurses. They're just burnt out. There is a tremendous shortage of EMTs. And the issue is, we have a basic life support and advanced life support, but everyone is, vying for this very limited pool of qualified individuals. And it's
way too low.
way too low. Yeah, and the fact that they're not considered essential worker, I mean, who comes up with these definitions?
Well, and they're also, you're not a taxing authority, like our fire
The fire
departments
department
are
is
taxing authorities, so they actually have some money they can,
Yeah, I'm just saying
It's
they're,
for
they're
that.
dealing with massive attrition as
Yes,
well.
they
So
are.
I'm just
Yeah, I
thinking.
think volunteerism generally is having problems
Right.
around here, but across the country.
oh, come talk into the mic, 'cause people
Sorry.
can't hear you at
I
home.
was gonna say, volunteerism is having, people having problems with volunteerism, not just here, but across the country.
Right.
And certainly we're seeing it at CVAC, I know the fire department is as well, and other agencies also, outside EMS.
What if we did like a volunteer drive day, like a town volunteer drive day where you had the fire departments, you'd have CVAC, you could even have the town, committees and all different things, anything we as a municipality want our amazing citizens to volunteer for. Maybe we could do a volunteer day and have some fun things for the kids, and
People could get educated.
Yeah.
people
Yeah,
can
we
get
welcome that, yeah.
educated, the high school kids can come,
There
adults.
is a youth one that's usually at the Congregational Church. They have one for all of the high school students for volunteering. And they also have the volunteer thing at the high school. But if we incorporated adults, that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Is there something we can do that beyond, promoting it, that sort of becomes, it's an enticement? I mean,
Right, so,
But
we,
some other form of enticement to people.
right, so there are,
It's these clothes.
yeah,
Well, the
It is a good-looking
uniform, the dress,
sweatshirt right
the dress
there.
uniform. That's the one. The dress uniform is the key.
so there are tax incentives where if you are, how many years in the back?
It's, after 5 years in the VAC, in the 6th and 7th year and going forward, you get a 10% discount on your property taxes. But again, it takes 5 years to get there, and Newcastle offers it, Mount Pleasant does, but Mount Kisco doesn't. So we have certain people living in Mount Kisco, for instance, and they get nothing. And 10% is nice, and we appreciate it certainly, but other incentives might be helpful as well. So certainly,
Yeah, I
we would
think
welcome
we
the
should- we
opportunity to
should
get more
explore that.
incentives.
Like
Right.
free parking at the.
Yeah,
Well, I'm just
parking.
thinking it could be that. It could be coordination with retailers where there's discounts.
Yeah.
There could
things
be
like that.
And
promotional
we give
things.
camp discounts, right? Town camp?
Yeah, we've actually explored this, and we were told that we couldn't do it. Maybe we want to take and revisit it, but our counsel from Keenan Bean has already told us that, we could not give discounts for camp. We actually offered discount for parking, but then we realized that, if people are in the city, they
Right.
can't be helping us here, so it wasn't really
Right.
all that helpful in the scheme of things. Because parking was always a big deal, but, camp or our recreation programs, things like that. Whether or not we might be able to, give deep discounts where it would be worth it for someone, if they've got 3 kids and they're paying half price at, camp, to take and volunteer, because that's serious money. Not that 10% off your tax bill isn't, but I'm
Right.
just
Right.
saying.
I thought we
Yeah.
did give
Should
camp
explore that.
discounts.
Honestly, it's really, we have many more people who are. We have many more people who are older and don't have young kids. They don't have, people who have young kids mostly don't have time to do that. We have some young mothers who are, who work during the day, who volunteer during the day, but for the most part, they're older.
Is the 5-year waiting period standard, or is there any
Yeah,
way to?
That's state.
It's actually New York state law.
Okay.
So.
Well, can we revisit that? Ed?
We can. What would need to happen is we would need a contract, and we need to lay out things like that in a contract at a minimum.
Yeah.
What do you
I mean,
mean
I'm just thinking this,
contract?
we're reaching critical
A
contract
contract
with
with the
whom?
organization.
portions here.
The difficulty is doing this on an ad hoc, okay, we'll let this slide or give a discount here or waive a fee there. If we folded things like that into a contract that came before the board, was voted on in a public meeting, then that becomes viable.
But if we did something like, really promotional and again said to retailers, restaurants, like it's a small thing, but it might, I don't know, just sort of raises awareness, and B, it becomes like a nice, if you're CVAC, you bring your family to
Right.
whatever, you get
Yeah.
50% off or something.
To your point, in addition to being first lieutenant, I'm also general counsel, so would look forward to working with you on that.
Sure.
So in terms of what I wanted to discuss, I want to discuss how we get financed. So first of all, we're an independent organization. We're not affiliated with the fire department or any other organization. We're our own organization totally. In terms of how we get our operating income, we get no support at all at this point from anyone other than donations and by giving services to our patients. When we go out on a call, if the patient has insurance especially, we bill for that, and usually we'll get paid something by the insurance company. If we don't transport the patient, then there's no charge at all. So that's a total freebie. But we have no governmental support whatsoever. We get donations from the public. That's been roughly around the same every year. It doesn't change much. We're looking to increase it over time. We're trying to look for ways to do that. But frankly, at this point, one of the things we're thinking about is whether if we can't get more volunteers, the need possibly to go to a partly paid staff, at least for a temporary basis. Most of the VACs around here are partly paid. We're one of the few, actually, one of the only ones, frankly, that's not. For instance, all of the ambulance services in Mount Pleasant, consisting of Pleasantville, Valhalla, Hawthorne, Sleepy Hollow, and Briarcliff, they're all mostly paid staff. They're volunteers usually on the weekends and sometimes at night, but during the days they're almost entirely paid staff. We've avoided doing that. We're one of the few that hasn't, which is one of the reasons our mutual aid volume on a percentage basis went up. When you're paying people to be there, they're there. They don't have to rely upon people to volunteer. But if we do need to go partly paid ever, at least for a temporary basis, we will need financial help with that because we couldn't possibly afford to do that on our own. We're hoping to avoid it. We're looking at various ways to do that, but that might be something we can't avoid, at least in the short term. So in terms of, Kate's talked about ALS and BLS. So ALS is advanced life support. So the Newcastle residents do pay a tax for ALS. And I know that Al Kim came to you guys a couple of weeks ago from Westchester Emergency Medical Services, WEMS, to talk about that. So when someone calls 911 and reports a problem to the dispatcher, depending what the problem is, either they'll dispatch us alone, a BLS call, something not very serious, could be like someone slipped and fell and basically hurt their leg or whatever, or it could be something more serious like a heart attack, in which case they'll dispatch both us and the WEMS ambulance, or the WEMS paramedic rather, who comes in a fly car, basically a big SUV. They can transport, and if they need to ride in the ambulance, they'll ride with us to the hospital. So the ALS is always they always get paid. They're paid professionals. They're not volunteers. We're volunteers. The people oftentimes mistake, they see that on their bill, their tax bill. They think it's going to us, but in fact it's not. So again, we get no governmental support at this point. And that's one bit of confusion we do want to clear up, make sure you guys understand it, and also with the community, that while they do pay for ALS services, that none of that goes to us. So the last thing I'm going to mention is where we are in town. People don't necessarily know where we are. We're up on North Greeley, past the post office, go a little bit further into near the condos, and that's where we are. We've been there forever. Used to be the American Legion Hall, and we eventually became CVAC. We've been there forever, and that's where we're located. So happy to answer any questions, and look forward to working with you guys as we move forward.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
We should look at fundraiser.
Yeah, well,
Hi, I'm Peter Spira. I've lived in Chappaqua for 20 plus years. I just recently joined the CVAC, and I just want to say, for anybody listening, maybe considering it, it has been really fun and rewarding in the short time that I've been here. And honestly, I would highly recommend it. Okay, and I just started my ambulance training today, which I'm very excited about. And after that, I plan to go through EMT training. And I will say that the idea that I'm going to drive the ambulance and maybe be an EMT is really exciting for me. And the other thing I will just say is that when I signed up, I was not even aware of the shortage of EMTs and drivers. So definitely, and it was just more of a coincidence. So definitely we are not really doing a good job of getting that message out. And in my opinion, even things as simple as signs, that are viewable maybe on the green would be pretty useful.
What's the length of time? So Peter joins, how long before Peter becomes an EMT?
I was going on calls after about 7 days after signing up.
Right.
Okay, so there's not a big lag time. It was great, actually, okay, because I was able to join, and I had that initial enthusiasm, and immediately I was riding in the ambulance.
Got it.
It was, I'd say, about a 6-week process to get officially voted into the organization. But during that time, you can still participate. So you can participate, really from day one. Then the driver training, which I started today, would take how long generally? You want to?
So we have 4 classes of members, Youth Corps, so high school juniors and seniors who participate in Youth Corps, and they basically, we train them in first aid and CPR, and they ride in the ambulance as aiders. We have aiders, which Peter currently is. When you join CVAC as a new person, again, you take CPR and first aid, and you get to go on the ambulance as an aider to help the EMT with a call. After you're ridden for a little while, you have a choice of either becoming a driver, in which case we start driver training, and that could range anywhere from a couple of weeks if you have experience to 6 months or approximately, depending how often you drive, to get trained on how to drive the ambulance. The last thing you could do is become an EMT. So I teach at Phelps. I teach part of the EMT courses there. So that is about a 4 or 5 month process to become an EMT. You go to school 3 nights a week, sometimes Saturdays. It's a combination of both learning lectures as well as lab classes. I teach the lab classes. And after that, you take a New York State practical test on skills and then a New York State written test to test your information. After you pass both of those, you become an EMT. You come back to CVAC at that point. We then start having you ride as an EMT newbie. After about 10 or 15 calls where we're comfortable that you have the requisite experience to go out on your own, at that point you become a crew chief, you go out on calls. So becoming an EMT is actually a pretty long process. It's probably 9 months to a year, depending how you time it, from becoming, when you first start the process of becoming an EMT to when you're a crew chief.
Got it. Thanks.
So I think what could be interesting is if you explored maybe doing a Q&A as part of the newsletter so that so the general public can get a sense of, what's entailed and what the organization's all about. And then maybe we could even do on social media some profiles of different volunteers. Might be kind of interesting because I bet there's a lot of people out there that have, full-time jobs and they're really busy and what have you, but they don't recognize that this is an opportunity for them to give back to the community. It could be something they're interested in, so.
Yeah, maybe that can be a prelude to a volunteer day.
Yeah, and I'm thinking also now that a lot of people are working from home and not necessarily going into the city on a regular basis, that maybe there is some time in the schedule to just sort of, break up your day and take a couple of hours and do it. Before when everybody, our parking lots were full, there was nobody here to help. But, that's not the case anymore, at least not as of this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And definitely, if you want to send me like a little write-up, would be great just to have. And contact information where you would like people, if they do want to volunteer, who they should contact.
We have a new website.
Oh, great.
Okay, great.
And also maybe check with people if they're comfortable doing that profile idea, which is great, and, to submit pictures and little blurbs maybe.
Yeah.
The e-news, maybe like dedicated e-newsletters once a month about volunteer opportunities and things like that. Because what happens is we have so much in each of our e-newsletters that by the time you get to the bottom where we have a standing, ad, don't forget to volunteer for CVAC and the fire departments, people don't always
Nobody's
get to the
reading
bottom.
it.
It becomes
yeah.
wrote towards the
Yeah,
bottom because
yeah.
you see the same thing, so, yeah.
You also let them know where they can place signs now, just even before the new code gets, just so
They can
You
use
can-
the electronic signboard.
Yeah, you can use the electronic signboard, let us know what you want, and you can also put signs on private property, on your lawn, you can put that there, and at least for the time being, until,
and any public space, at least 3 feet from curb or anything that they, so that,
not right now.
No, John.
I see. So anybody that dies between now and then.
Yeah. we can.
Okay,
Okay, thank you guys so much.
all right,
Good to
thank
see
you
Thank you very
so
much.
much for coming.
Is this working?
Yeah, it's working.
Going to,
Thank you.
going to jump around a little bit on the
Hey, Kate.
agenda because I've
Sure.
got Tom and Sabrina here to talk with us about the grade level residential apartments.
Yep.
Sabrina, Tom, who would like to take the lead on this?
Hello.
Sabrina, we can't hear you. Actually, we can't hear. We're having technical difficulties. So, Ed, do you want to just give a brief intro while we're waiting to hear from them?
Sure. So it's coming to the board on a recommendation from Sabrina and Tom. And right now, in the BR and the BRP districts, which the board is very familiar with, we have a requirement that we have a non-commercial, a non-residential commercial use on the street level. And if you're going to have a residential, it has to be above that commercial use. But because of the King Street Hill, we have situations where we have the ability, property owners have the ability to put residential below street level. And, now you're.
But it's still walkout.
It's a walkout because of the elevation change. But now you're technically you're below street level and below the grade level commercial. That's not permitted. So very simply, this amendment would allow that situation to be permitted and for residential to be developed in those spaces.
Yeah, and
So I think Tom and I can speak at this point. You have before you changes to the existing code, slight changes that will allow subgrade apartments with access behind first floor commercial uses to second floors if necessary. And it's carefully drafted so that we are not impinging upon first floor commercial requirements. Tom, do you want to add anything?
Yes, it needs to be mentioned that the lower level apartments will have direct access to the public way, if you will, so that there is not a subterranean effect. These are, full approvable apartments by the building codes, by the fire codes, but they would just be accessed by a lower level entrance. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just add, this is something that, resident Chuck Napoli had pointed out to me a few months ago. And, when you drive up King Street and you realize on the west side of the street that these units are there, it's really just this quirk of the code from, I think, 2004 that made them inaccessible. And they're, in fact, units that exist that predated that code change. And so it really is an opportunity to create, I don't know what the number would be, but, some number of available units right in town that won't have any impact on the character of the hamlet or commercial uses on the first floor, so.
Approximately how many units would that add? Residential units?
I can answer that question, if you will. We're looking at least a dozen units that have potential to be added. Mr. Napoli's King Street location would add at least 2 just in that one location. And there's many locations going up the northwest side of King Street that are applicable for residential that have been only used for commercial in the past, and most of them are empty commercial now because they're hard to rent.
So I think this is a very interesting idea, and my guess is that when the law was written, requiring first floor retail with apartments above, it wasn't really contemplated that there was a possibility to have apartments below that were still, walk out full apartments. So I agree with Chris that it does allow us to get potentially a number of dozen new units with still ensuring that we have activating uses on the retail ground floor level, and it's not requiring us to build up or really change the character at all. So I'm very interested in exploring this.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree too.
So Ed, our next steps that we would have a public hearing?
Yeah, so the memo that's in the packet actually lays out what the code amendments would look like, pretty straightforward. And we would prepare a proposed local law, schedule a public hearing. We could do that next week.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Great.
Perfect.
And I want to thank Chuck, Napoli, and Chris for
Absolutely.
bringing that to our attention.
All right, well, that was an easy one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sabrina, thanks, Tom.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you.
All right, so what are we moving on to? Or do you want to go
Well-
back to the sewer line project?
Sure. So let me just hand this out to the group. Just take one here, this guy. So we just want to make you aware of a project that's going on. It's a Westchester County project. It's the Westchester County DEF. Thank you. In conjunction with the diversion project, the wastewater diversion project in Riverwoods and Yeshiva, there was a choke point identified that is located on Hunts Lane that really prevented any expansion of the current system. And so the county, in its engineering studies, in trying to lay out a plan that would allow Riverwoods and Yeshiva to divert through Mount Kisco, identified this one choke point and came up with a relief sewer plan. So in other words, instead of disturbing the sewer that's there, they would simply install a second leg of the sewer to run parallel to it to help alleviate some of the congestion as pipes change from, Bob Sealy's going to kill me for getting the numbers wrong, but there's a larger pipe that goes into a smaller pipe, and it creates a choke point. So they're in the midst of finalizing their engineering work, but one of the things they did was they came to us to let us know that this project was going to start either at the end of 2020 or the spring of 2023. They expect it to be a 24-month project at least, weather permitting. It runs along Hunts Lane, which is already a congested area. There is no place else to put it. This is where it has to go.
And they have to rip up the whole street?
Yes. They will be doing it in phases, and believe it or not, the more disruptive part of it is how they're going to rip up the street. They have determined that the soil that is there is actually, it's called schist. It's a metamorphic rock, but it's very hard. And so it will involve chipping away at it. It's going to be loud and noisy and
Jackhammers.
Would that
basically.
be all along Hunts Lane from close to the sawmill to the Parkway?
No, so it's going, yeah, so it's going to be from like Dewar's Garage back to the DPW area.
So there's conifer.
There's
I wonder
school
how-
buses.
Beyond
Yeah, and I
that, yeah,
was-
there's school buses, there is, so we've met
World
with,
Cup.
we've met with Seth Corwin. We will be meeting with the other residents and business owners of Hunts Lane. But one of the things that we wanted to talk to Chappaqua Transportation about was the hours. Because right now, the hours that we've recommended are 4:30. He put
Oh,
down
God,
one, but
don't
that's
say
not
it.
right. Yeah, it's not, that's not right. It's 4:30 to like 10 or 4:30 to 11 is what we've told them.
So the problem is that that is going to be very noisy work at night.
Right, but there's no other time for them to do it, and the problem is that if I allow them to do it during the day, it means that the buses can't get in and out.
Right.
You've also got, World Cup going on there and little kids being in the building,
The traffic is very heavy for World Cup.
very heavy.
Now, is there a possibility that they can get a good portion of it done over the summer, at least the drilling portion of it?
So they can do some of it, but you're talking about a 2-year project, and I tried to take and create the, the timeline where they'll break it down, but the way it works is, the rock excavation's gonna be 9 weeks, but it's
Right.
gonna be separated by a minimum of 2 months to 4 months. They're gonna break it into 6 segments. So you're going to have a week, and then it's going to be 2 months, and then it's going to be another week, and then it's going to be 2 to 3 months, and then it's going to be another week of the drilling as they take and they move down. Because the other issue is that it's a gravity sewer, so they have to be able to situate it properly, and it goes down very deep in order for them to get the pitch that they need. So can some of it be done over the summer? Sure. Can all of it be done over the summer? No.
Is it possible to start over the summer where they're closer to the residents so that it moves away?
Yes, but it's in stages, so they're gonna be, in front of one resident, and then 6 weeks later, they're gonna be in front of the next one. And then 6 weeks later, they're gonna be in the front of the next one. So everyone is going to be disturbed along the way.
Do we know how many residents roughly, like in that?
Well, the problem is that you've got Chestnut Oaks across, right on the other side of the railroad tracks. So although you're not doing work right in front of them, they are absolutely going to be impacted. And, people are going to hear it. When we did our downtown and we
Redux.
installed an alternate, a temporary water system. And when they used a hydraulic tool to take and tighten the clamps, the bolts, I guess, residents heard it all through the town. They weren't next door, they were 2 blocks away, they were 4 blocks away, they were half a mile away. You hear it at night, sound travels.
Does the week include the weekend?
I don't believe so. They never worked on Sundays when we had our downtown infrastructure, and they rarely worked on Saturdays. So I'm just giving the board just a heads up. It's not finalized yet, but it's close. It's possible that we can change some of the hours over the summer to make it earlier so that they're not disturbed at night, maybe when the buses aren't running so quickly, but, they need to be able to go out and bid, and at this point, those are the hours that they've got.
Right. I would love to see it pushed as much as possible over the summer. I know it says they're not starting till fall, but, and give them more hours potentially over the summer while it's less invasive because you're not having, the school buses aren't running they're running, but not as often. World Cup is not as busy.
They have camp.
They have camp, but it's, so, if we can push it a bit over the summer, I know it's not getting,
Yeah, the problem is that, I mean, we'll see what we can do. It's not our project,
right.
so we are asking very respectfully to see what kind of hours and things like that we can get. I like the idea that maybe they can work a couple, some later days over the summer to try to take and truncate the schedule as much as possible.
And are there days we can give them where we don't want them working at night? Like if we have concerts in the park, you will not be able to hear them if there are jackhammers there.
Yeah, I don't know.
We should just look if there's anything going on. Community Day.
Well, Community Day, again, I
That's a
don't think
Sunday
they're working
or
on
Saturday, but,
Saturdays. Okay. We will
Okay.
have additional conversations about that, I guarantee you. And Bob Seoli will come in with the chart and, you can ask him pointed questions. But this was a really good start, and this is good for me to be able to go back and hopefully present some flexibility in the schedule for them to see if there's a way that they can expedite during certain times.
Do you mind sending us the attached schedule that?
I thought I actually did, because
Bob
that was
mentions.
part of the problem, is I couldn't print it out.
Oh, okay.
When I printed it, it came out too small. You can probably enlarge it on your computer, which is why I
Got it,
forwarded it
okay.
to the group.
okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks, Jill.
And again, I'm happy to have Bob Seoli come in, and I'll have him come in May. We'll go through this, and you can, ask him all the additional questions. Okay,
Okay,
all right, want to go to sign ordinance, go to something easy in comparison?
sure.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Sign law, Ed.
This one's not easy.
No, I know.
I
No
know.
such luck.
So at the last meeting, the board had discussion about the proposed local law, and there was discussion about some of the distinctions that would be drawn into focus if it's adopted in its current form. For example, the residential sign provision in the existing code limits the size of those signs. You can think of those as message signs to 2 square feet. But the temporary event sign, as it's drafted now, would be 9 square feet. One answer to that could be that the messaging sign on your property, your residential property, can be there forever. And the temporary sign's got to come down in 30 days. But that's not necessarily a satisfactory answer. And it's a little bit like pulling a thread on your jacket. When we start looking at those distinctions that are in the code and that would be drawn into sharper focus with this kind of an amendment, we start asking ourselves more questions. And Chris and I had a long conversation this morning noodling out some of those hypotheticals. And so rather than come back to the board with tweaks that may or may not be the right fit, we thought that the board ought to have a broader discussion as to whether there needs to be a more robust reworking of the existing code and maybe eliminating some of the distinctions that we have now among the exempt signs, so the contractor signs, the for sale signs. We would potentially have the temporary event sign in there too, and trying to make those fit better with the regulations we already have on the residential signs.
So I think there does, and we brought this up last time we discussed it, that I think while what we're looking at now is really just limited to temporary event signs, I think we do need to look at how that fits into the sign code as, on a larger scale and figure that out. To me, in terms of size, for instance, of any sign, the reason we have a size limitation is really, I think, a safety issue in terms of it not, blocking sight lines, in terms of it not, being too obtrusive. So to me, there should be no differentiation between a sign that is, a messaging sign, let's say a Black Lives Matter sign, as opposed to a sign advertising a football game. There's no reason I see why there should be a difference in size as it relates to those signs.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, and it's important, and I think maybe just take just a step back, because the existing law, the basic premise is no signs anywhere, right? And then there are exceptions, and then there are definitions, and then there's a whole provision on, location and general provisions defining location. And right now, there are 4 categories of exemptions, which Ed's talked about, right? Directional signs, property identification signs, sale signs, contractor identification signs. And the idea here was to increase those exemptions by adding the temporary sign. And, Maggie Ferguson pointed this out a couple of meetings ago, that there's inconsistency, and there are certain people who live in residential areas where they don't have the ability to put a sign on the border of the lot line because of shrubs or other things. And so they're being disadvantaged, and then why limit that to temporary event signs? And so when Ed and I were talking about this, first of all, putting aside constitutionality, because the law is incredibly unclear, and we're probably, in uncharted territory whenever you do anything like this. The idea was to say, okay, first of all, are we saying temporary event signs are allowed anywhere in town, right? Because the way the existing code is worded right now, there is a blanket prohibition on any sign in the public right-of-way, except as set forth in the provision regarding exemptions. And so if we add this section here, we are saying temporary event signs can be placed both on the contiguous right-of-way next to your property, right, adjacent to. So I can't come and put a sign on the right-of-way next to your property, but I could put one on the right-of-way next to my property, subject to the 5-foot setback rule. But I could also go to the triangle on 117 and put a Greeley football sign or Unite Newcastle, vote November 2nd sign, right? But there are no limits. I could put 50 of those signs under this current ordinance, right? And in the residential sign provision, to Ed's point, it's a 2 square foot limit, and then there's a maximum of 10 square feet on my property. So
For 1 acre or more.
what's that?
If it's 1 acre or more.
Exactly, and if it's less
Right.
than 1 acre, it's not even that. So
5 square feet.
So you've got all these inconsistencies, and so one thought was, let's come up with uniform size, right? Number one. So if we're going to say 3 feet by 3 feet in the public right of way and the adjacent to your property temporary event sign, let's then say residential signs can also be 3 by 3, right? That's number one. Number two, why distinguish on your own property, meaning the adjacent part of the public right of way, between temporary event signs and messaging signs, or what the town in the Reed decision called ideological signs. So if I've got a sign and I want to put it on the border of my property, subject to the 5-foot setback that says Greeley football or vote Unite Newcastle, why can't I also put a Black Lives Matter sign there? So that would be another potential addition to make it somewhat.
I think you should be able to do that.
Right now, this law wouldn't allow that,
Right.
right? Now, the code as it exists, to your point, Lisa, definitely considers safety, but it also balances the right of individuals to identify their messages and the right of the public to be protected against the unrestricted proliferation of signs. That's the first principle in the existing code.
Yes.
So I think we need to also fix the gap that says nothing about limitations.
I
can't,
agree.
I mean, right now, if this law were adopted, I could go to the Triangle on 117 and put 40 Greeley football signs and literally pepper it like sunflowers. So there has to be some limitation there. So there's kind of a lot of, to Ed's point, threads when you pull at it that create inconsistency, and doing something that kind of harmonizes messaging signs on your property, the size of the signs so that it's consistent, but then also places limits on how many signs can be placed in the public right-of-way, would create a more workable solution. So those were sort of the things we talked about and I think need to be explored.
Right. And then we're differentiating between public right-of-way like the triangle or an island in the middle of the road with the right-of-way that borders this asphalt that's contiguous to your own property. So to me, that's the area subject to the 5-foot setback that you really can put anything on your property. We'll limit it, to size, but I'm talking about whether it's a messaging sign, whether it's an event sign, you should be able to exercise your free speech there. The thought was that messaging signs would not be allowed on the other public rights of way, like a triangle sign, the triangle say, but you could put an event sign there, and then that's subject to maybe limitations as to number that can go there, as well as obviously time sensitivity. It can only be up for 30 days before an event. It has to be down 3 days after an event. The thought being that those signs are really because we're trying to notify the public as to something that's going on that they need to be aware of, as opposed to that has a time sensitive date, as opposed to just general messaging.
Right. I agree with that.
General messaging, and then certainly people can rent, our triangle sign, whatever that may be, or the banners for other reasons.
And we would still have, for signs that have a temporal component to them, those would still need to come down.
Yes.
Because again, the first principle of our existing code is to avoid massive proliferation of signs.
Right. And look, part of it is educating the public. Around an election, nobody loves to see all the signs, but you know what? That's part of our country. We're to encourage people to vote, and it's annoying, yes, but that's why we're saying, they can be up 30 days before, let's say, an election, and then they have to be down within 3 days after. And that's going to be the same if you put that for a farmer's market sign or a Greeley football sign. Obviously, you're not putting that up necessarily for 30 days. I think the longest signs that would be up would be political signs, really, before an election. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But I think that's the point, is we're trying to balance, making sure people aren't inundated by signs with allowing people to express their First Amendment rights, and making sure that we're able to, advertise things that our community needs to know about.
Also, I have just one more point about the way the law is written, the way the code is structured, and maybe it has to be structured this way. So you and I haven't had a chance to talk, so I don't want to take up too much time if there's a back story to this, but I see the structure as 410D9 saying that no signs can be erected on private property except as specified. Then D10, specifies the exemptions. There are 4 exemptions, and we're adding the 5th as temporary signs. And then in a separate subsection, it then allows for messaging signs. So I think that's why people didn't think it covered the messaging signs. So what I'm asking is there a way to restructure the code to make it more, to make it clearer, and to have all of that be, laid out as exemptions? And I don't know if that was part of your suggestion, Chris, but just to clarify the way the code is structured itself, I don't see the need to have the messaging signs be in subsection D12.
Our code is very difficult to read and
It's
understand.
unnecessarily confusing. So I just want to make clear to everyone who thinks they're there's no permission for messaging signs, that it is there in 410D12.
Yes,
But the two square feet,
Yes, the
the
idea would
not
be.
to exceed 10 square
The
feet, et
the idea
cetera.
would be to
So-
harmonize that from a size perspective. The idea would be to make sure that,
Right.
that we're allowing messaging signs not just in the center of your property, but on the border, right?
On
So-
the, right.
But we're not expanding it to allow messaging signs in the triangle on 117, right? Because we're basically saying, at the end of the day, there is still a notion that we're not going to allow proliferation of signs all over town. And
Right.
so that would be limited there. Temporary event signs.
Well, D10
Sure.
is regarding private property.
Correct.
So I guess
D12,
what I'm.
D12 is private property. D10 is the district regulation throughout town.
Throughout town,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and a
But it's-
messaging sign has no, by definition, has no expiration date. So there would be no way to enforce pulling them down. Whereas, an event sign, there is. So that's the distinction between why that can be in a public right-of-way.
And D10 right now is, as I mentioned, the exception also to D15, which says you can't have a sign in a public right-of-way. So, again, we have to be clear in this new language that, we're not creating an exception for non-event signs in the public right-of-way anywhere. It's just in the public right-of-way adjacent to your property.
Right.
So that would be the
Right.
distinction, which is important for people to be able to, if I can put up a sign on the edge of my property that says Greeley football, I should be able to put up a sign that has a message as well. That would be the idea.
I agree that the way the code is written now is confusing. And if you look at some of the different provisions, we have amendments starting back in the 1970s. And it's been amended a number of times. And the law has evolved, right? Most, I think, significantly with the Reed against Town of Gilbert case in 2015 that the Supreme Court issued. And we're going to have another, I think, potentially significant sign decision from the Supreme Court later this year, probably in June. So we'll see what that tells us. But conceptually, what I'm thinking is that we would collapse part of D10, which has the exemptions, and I think the first two can probably stay where they are. That's your street signs and your street numbers. I don't think there's any question or any problem with leaving them where they are as exempt. But the other two and then three categories, if we include temporary event signs, I'm thinking again conceptually that those need to be folded into a section that deals with residential messaging signs.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. And somewhere put messaging signs so that people can understand what the different signs are being referred to.
Right, there are definitions, but we'll take a look at those as well and see if they need to be tweaked.
And then harmonize the size, and then, we need to account for number. And
To that point, what are the board's thoughts on number? So right now, as we said a moment ago, 1 acre or more, currently it's 10 square feet, less than an acre, it's 5. I think it's actually half an acre. If we're bringing the sign size, the max size up to 9 square feet, those numbers don't work any longer. What are the board's thoughts on that?
I mean, right now, again, if you drive around town, you certainly see signs that are all over the lot in terms of that size, and they're way beyond 2 square feet. I mean, if someone has a sign on their property, I think 3 by 3 is fine, and then I think, that would allow for, that's 9 square feet, and if we said, 20 square feet, as long as no one sign is more than 3 by 3, that's effectively 2 signs of that size, and then 1 by 2. I mean, I don't
was
imagine
thinking
a
the
scenario
same
if we
thing.
did that, we're gonna see signs sprout up like poppies. I just think that allows people to have maybe a political sign and a message sign, both 3 by 3.
I think that's reasonable.
I agree.
Also, an oddity is that we need to change, to tweak, is that you can have a 3 by 3 sign, but the top of the sign can't be more than 3 feet off the ground. So then the sign would have to be essentially on the ground.
That came out of the discussion about having the signs close to the edge of the roadway, and if they're no more than 3 feet off the top of the ground, theoretically, a driver could see it.
But the sign itself is 3 feet, can be 3 feet high.
Right.
So you're saying that has to touch the ground.
But
I
it
mean,
doesn't
just
have
seems
to be
silly.
3
Have to
feet
be
high.
Doesn't have to be.
three. And most
signs are not
not
3 feet
square,
high.
right? Most signs are a rectangle, right? And so in theory, and this was obviously Tom's point, which is you need that height limit, because if people are turning a corner, if it's more than 3 feet, it could actually become an obstruction. I mean, I know your point, Vicki, which is that
It
if
just
if
looks.
you-
Most
If
signs
you
are like
max it out.
18 by 24, I would say.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So, and I measured 3
did,
feet
okay,
from
yeah.
the ground to, and that, most signs are not higher
But
than
to your
that.
point, if you had a sign like the farmer's market sign, that does go almost to the ground. It's like a triangle sign. So
Right.
theoretically.
So
you
it
could
has
do
to
it.
touch the ground.
In that case,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
it doesn't have to be 3 by 3, but if you wanted to, you could, I guess. is the point.
Right. Right.
Now, I think, don't actually allow for signs similar to the farmer's market sign right now. What are they called? The
Sandwich signs.
sandwich signs, right? I'm pretty sure there's an exemption, an explicit, it says you cannot have a sandwich sign like that. Pretty sure I read that in there.
Not sure if I have seen
I
that.
didn't see that. But
I thought I
it's not,
did.
it's not allowed
but-
now anyway, so it's
Yeah,
sort of
it's
a
not
moot
right.
point. I mean,
I think you may be thinking there's a provision in the commercial district for sidewalk signs. That might be what you're thinking
Maybe.
about.
So getting back to the limit on the number of signs, I'd hate, I don't know, I'm just thinking back to like the last election, right? Or you have a big election where lots of people are up. If somebody wants to put 3 different campaign signs on their property, I don't really have a problem with that. It's because those, again, have a limited time period in which they can be up and displayed. To me, that's different from allowing, 12 messaging signs. But I know we want to balance in a public right of way, I guess that's one thing, but, I guess we want to balance the proliferation of signs with allowing people to say what they want to say.
we currently have, again, forget the public right of way, which right now doesn't allow signs at all.
I know.
Right? On your own home right now, we have a 5 square foot limit and a 10 square foot limit, right? So that by definition puts a collar on how many signs you can have.
Correct.
So the idea that we're not going to have some limit, to me, is stretching this way too far. I think
No, I
if
know.
we
I
keep-
just
we
want to
keep-
try to find what
No,
the
but I think
right
if we
balance
keep a
is.
square footage limit, right, then you can have, if it's 10 square feet, or we said 20 square feet, right? Theoretically, you could have 6, 7, 1 by 2, or 18 by 24 signs. I mean, I guess what I'm thinking, more importantly, because that's a limit that exists now, if we're expanding this to, say, the triangle on 117, which I keep using, if we don't have a limit, then that entire triangle could be covered with signs.
There,
and
I
that's
would
a
say
disaster.
1 sign
But I think
per
also,
event.
you're starting to veer into treating signs differently based on content now.
Well,
No,
I
we're
mean,
still
we-
talking generally messaging
we are
versus.
unquestionably in gray area this whole discussion.
It's getting grayer.
This whole discussion is.
But
gray.
I think it is gray anyway. There's no,
Well, yeah.
I don't think there's a black and white,
But what's-
rule here,
right, but what's
unfortunately.
the policy?
Are you talking about treating campaign signs differently than other temporary signs?
No.
No. Lisa was just
Okay.
using that as an example.
I was just using an
Oh, I see,
example.
okay.
Like theoretically, you could see a person who says, well, I've got a child who plays Greeley football, so I want a Greeley football sign. And then I'm supporting Vidot Gashi for county legislator, so I've got a Vedot sign.
And then
I'm
I've got a
supporting-
Greeley Senior.
I've got a Greeley Senior, and
Right.
then I've got a Unite Newcastle. That's 4 right there. And then you would say, okay, what's the square footage limit? And then the temporal signs have to come down after the election, so they come down. And so that's sort of putting definition on proliferation, which is the number one policy behind the existing code. It certainly limits it in terms of safety. So,
Right, and then no event sign is going to be up for more than 30 days. So it, to say there's going to be proliferation of signs, there might be for a 30-day period, but then
Right.
they're coming down.
right. But subject to limits, that it's not going to be,
Yeah.
So for example, look, last fall, there were probably property owners that had 10 signs along the road, right? If we do this, that wouldn't be allowed,
Right.
which I think is a good thing.
And then I think in the public right-of-ways, like the 117 Island, the capital P public right-of-ways, I think one sign per event should be allowed, and that's it. So you can't put 12 Greeley football signs on that property for 30 days. It's one.
We could have a proximity provision, so you can't put the same sign within a certain distance of another.
Okay.
Well, but that gets into, if you've got neighbors right next to each other, you can't not allow them to put a sign on their own property.
Well, no, because you would always allow someone to put a sign on the adjacent right-of-way to their property, right?
But if it's a proximity sign, I think it's going to be hard. If you're saying you can't have the same sign within.
Well, I think we'd have to come up with the definition of what, because right now, 410D15 doesn't define public right-of-way. So I think the way Ed had drafted the exemption in E, it talked about adjacent to a private residence.
Right.
So we would distinguish between the public right-of-way adjacent to a private residence and then the public right-of-way, capital P, public
Right.
right-of-way.
Right.
And capital P, public right-of-way, we would say it has to be spaced. That's
Yeah,
what
it's a
you're suggesting.
definitional
If we could do
issue
that.
can be solved. Yeah.
The other issue to consider is, from a visual standpoint, if you look at the triangle, you'd want one sign facing one direction, hitting traffic in one area. You may want to have the same sign focused on another,
Direction.
direction from a traffic perspective. So then you
Well,
want more than one.
or a sandwich sign.
For one event. Right.
But you could have one that gets people coming from 117 and one that gets people coming from, whatever that street is that comes out, something like that, so.
Remember too, 117 is a state road. So the way we defined right-of-way in the draft was town right-of-way.
Right.
We can't
Right.
regulate in the state right-of-way.
Right. So we theoretically, just to go back to the fact pattern, last fall, was the DPW or the building department taking down signs on 117?
I don't think so.
No, they've been good about that.
Yeah, interesting. So the triangle
They were.
is basically fair game, absent county.
No, well, there's one side of it that is and one side of it that's not.
What do you mean?
One leg of the triangle is in the state has 120 coming up, and the other one is our local road.
Interesting. So if you were on the side that's county, basically, you could have done whatever you wanted.
State.
I mean, on the side that was state, you could have done whatever you wanted
Mhm.
until the state decided to take it down.
Yeah. Now, it doesn't mean the state didn't come by and take things down, because they did.
Yeah,
Because they
sure.
got complaints that there was a lot of stuff
Right.
along it. They came up 120, going up to Grappling School and took a whole bunch of things down. They went along 117, but that was not us.
Interesting. But definitionally, you have to address what the public right-of-way is, I think, to be clear.
Okay, and then just to throw a wrench into that, are we definitely wedded to the 5-foot setback? The reason I ask, and Tom, I know you like the 5 feet, but I was driving around town today looking at different people's properties, and I see signs up already for school board and things like that, and many people actually do not have 5 feet from the end of the road to, a fence or a stone wall or whatever it may be. So they put it, let's say, in their stone wall or, on their side of the sidewalk, which was still not necessarily 5 feet. So I just want to know how wedded you are to the 5 feet setback.
And I just want to add to that before you answer, it's particularly true in areas in town where the houses are smaller. So it's almost like we're treating large property owners differently than the small property owners. So that doesn't feel right to begin with. And let's see, I was going to add another point, but
Well,
I'll-
frontage is frontage.
Yeah, I don't think
That to me was not, it was more the configuration of the street.
right, but you have the smaller houses in town that, have at the edge of their property, they have a brick wall and they have a garage that starts right there. So, you're treating people differently. And I've seen a lot of mailboxes that are right at the edge of their properties as well, that are much more intrusive than any sign that could be put up.
So
I guess,
Tom, any
Tom, the
thoughts?
question would be, if we have a 3-foot-high limit, then doesn't that solve the?
And no matter what, we do have an overarching, provision in here that says if there's a safety concern, that trumps everything.
Right.
So certainly if there was a sign, no matter what size it was, even if it was further than 5 feet back, if it's a safety concern because sight lines or whatever it may be, that always trumps and would have to be moved back.
Yeah, I would be more comfortable. I know there has to be some distance, but I would be more comfortable with a 3-foot limit in order to at least attempt to treat all property owners similarly.
What do you think, Tom? I know we
I
put
don't
you on
want
the
to give you a hard
spot.
time, Tom. I'm very sorry to make these
That's
comments.
not at all. It's quite all right. I'm here to help where I can. This has always been a safety issue and a line of sight issue, and our town code 109 really required a 10-foot setback.
Right.
And in consultation with the town engineer, we felt going back 50% and putting it at 5 feet and keeping the signs below the line of sight increment, which was 3 feet 6 inches, allowed for adequate safety. And in those circumstances where it did not, we would just have to remove the sign and give it back to the applicant or have them pick it up because it was just an obstruction of safety. Going to that 3-foot increment, we now have that chance where cars are going back and forth quickly, the signs can get dislodged. I've picked up many loose signs on the roadways. I've seen signs get hit even at the 3-foot width. You have snow plows, you have service trucks, you have delivery vehicles pulling off the side of the road. It becomes a little disconcerting having the signs that close. I understand there's going to be properties that have sidewalks in front of them. There's also properties that their property line is at the edge of the sidewalk, so they never can be in the right of way because you cannot obstruct the sidewalk. So we have, it's a gray area, and it's getting a darker shade of gray every time we turn around. There's no real answer to this. I just felt, and the town engineer felt that at 5-foot setback, we maintained a very safe level, and it was a good compromise from what the code really required.
And you think that a 3-foot setback with the 3-foot maximum height requirement would pose a safety concern?
Well, if you have a 9-square-foot sign, it essentially becomes a sail. When you have large trucks and vehicles going by, the vacuum that's created by a large vehicle going by will tendency to keep pulling on that sign, and it can dislodge it from the ground. At 5 feet or more back from the edge of the pavement, the chance of that happening is a lot less. So we're looking at the safety aspect of this, not the content of the sign. And then the question comes, is the sign perpendicular to the road? Is it parallel with the road? None of that has ever been posed here as like, what is the orientation of the sign? And that's something to consider also when placing it, because if you're 5 feet back and you're parallel to the road, people driving have more of a chance to see and view a sign that's further set back as opposed to on top of the road, which is more of a blur as you're zipping past it. Now, you need time to have the ability to focus and read the sign, in my opinion. So, further back and allowing it to be 3 feet in total height, granted it doesn't have to touch the ground, gives time for the letters to be bigger, people to read the sign. But if you're on top of the road and cars are coming back and forth, you're never going to see it. It's just going to be a blur.
Well, Tom, that's just a convenience. Some people, I guess our point is that a lot of people don't have the 5 feet.
But I guess to play devil's out, I mean, I live on 117, the back of my property is, and I totally hear what Tom is saying. I mean, trucks go by my house at 45 miles an hour, and the signs that I had up last year, I had to go back out every couple of days and re-foot them because they were just blown over. So I totally take that point to heart, number one. Number two, we can't address the fact that different properties are configured differently. It's just nothing we can do about that. And if 5 feet, and I totally respect Tom's expertise and the engineer's expertise, if that's the limit they think makes sense from a safety standpoint, where signs are not going to be blown over, pulled out into the road, I don't see how much further we can go. At the end of the day, we're never going to accomplish, I mean, there are certainly going to be homes that don't have even 3 feet. And we already have distinctions, or have historically had distinctions between acre and more, or less than an acre, because, again, on a smaller lot, if you had 10 signs, it's the entire lot. So I think we can only go so far, to be honest.
Yeah, I do agree with that, and we can't possibly address every situation. I thought the 3 feet would simply encompass more people than the 5 feet.
I hear.
And
I think-
it's just a very rough way to,
Yeah. No, it's a blunt instrument. but-
It certainly is. So
think-
I'm not really pretending that we're going to treat everyone exactly the same, but you can just capture more people.
Well, that's why we're asking Tom. It's a work session. To me, safety does trump everything. So if that's why I wanted to confirm with Tom, if he feels that really from a safety perspective, we can't go less than 5 feet, then that's important. But we had to ask the question.
I do feel strongly on that, and I want to add one further comment. You do see mailboxes a lot closer, and that's a federal guideline from the United States Postal Service. We have no jurisdiction with that, and that's for the postman or postwoman to be able to service the mailboxes. There are certain height and depth guidelines that have to be met with those.
Yeah, I guess my point with that is that do we see a lot of accidents with those mailboxes?
Actually, we do. There's quite often,
Okay.
they're on the side of the
plows.
road, and then there's the occasional wielding baseball bat that takes out a mailbox or two when things get mischievous. But they have been points of impact, and people have gotten seriously hurt from mailboxes.
Okay, all right.
All right, so I think next steps are, we're going to continue to look critically at the sign policy and try to encompass all of the things we discussed today and put together a more cohesive draft for our next meeting.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, so now we're moving to administrative items. Okay.
Okay, under the administrative items tonight, we have the adoption of the March monthly reports. We have the authorization to attend conference for Tiffany White. She's attending a New York State and local managers conference up in Cornell. We have the authorization to extend the contract with O'Connor Davies, that's the town's independent auditor, for an additional 2 years, covering 2022 and 2023. We have the authorization to purchase water materials. These are water main repair materials for DPW. We have a resolution in support of the Town of Newcastle's contract execution for the electric vehicle charging infrastructure cost reimbursement from Con Ed's Make Ready program. That's for the electric chargers at Millwood Park. We're getting 90% reimbursement, almost $10,000 from Con Ed for this. Okay, we've got an Arbor Day proclamation for 2022, and the authorization to approve Barton and LaJudas for the grant application submittal that we discussed earlier.
And then also you skipped the Nikki Jones
Oh.
agency.
I did skip Nikki Jones. Authorization to amend the contract for Nikki Jones agency. She does some of the graphic design for us, business cards, letterhead, and I think the logo for those things. And I guess, Jill, there was a late addition request to use town property for Whitlaw on 4/23 from 12 to 4 for a block party.
Okay.
That's it.
Ed, I meant to bring this up to you before, but I didn't, so I'm sorry, I'm bringing it up right now. I saw from the governor recently that towns are allowed to adopt a law now where we would allow hybrid meetings so that the public could still participate over Zoom and not in person, but we would need to be in person. I would be in favor of the town board considering that because this allows greater access to the public to our meetings for those who feel that they can't attend in person given the pandemic and any other reason. Even if it's just kids home and you don't feel like being here at 10 o'clock at night, they can watch it online. So I think that was relatively time sensitive. Do you recall? I should have given you a heads up.
Not in the sense that right now, the board, all of our boards in the town can continue to have fully virtual meetings until June 7th.
Right.
After June 7th, if we want to avail ourselves of this new option, we'll need to have a local law in place. But we anticipated that.
Okay, perfect.
Here and in other places that our municipal clients are going to want to avail themselves. So
absolutely.
We're already looking at it.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Okay. So I think we are moving on to resolutions. A few. Most of our resolutions will be next week at our public meeting, but we did have a few today that we needed to adopt. So does anyone have them who wants to read them?
Sure. Authorization to hire 2 recreation employees. I move to authorize the hiring of Kathy Hildenbrand at the hourly rate of $16 and Sarah Knockler at the hourly rate of $15 for the position of recreation attendants within the Recreation Department to serve as Art Center assistants, effective April 20th, 2022.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I think I have
Any
to
abstaining?
recuse, right? Or abstain. I abstain.
Authorization to appoint, there you are. Authorization to appoint EPIC. I move to authorize the following appointments as members of the EPIC Committee for a 2-year term, effective April 20th, 2022 to April 19th, 2024. New members, Kelly Bronco, Katie McDermott, Carolyn Bilal, Bailey McCarthy, student. Reappointments, Tricia Kalman, Ella Ing, Lucille Rossi, CJ O'Brien, Jackie McCarthy.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Authorization to appoint Planning Board. I move to authorize the reappointment of Thomas Curley as a member of the Planning Board for a 5-year term, effective April 20th, 2022 to April 19th, 2027.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll take these.
Oh, okay. Authorization to appoint Chair Conservation Board. I move to authorize the appointment of Karen Anton as Chair of the Conservation Board for a 2-year term effective April 20, 2022 through April 19th, 2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Authorization to approve Griffin's Landscaping for spring cleanup at 48 Hates Cross Road. I move to authorize the approval of Griffin's Landscaping for the cleanup of 48 Hates Cross Road at an amount not to exceed $6,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Authorization to approve Barton and Laguadis for grant submittal. I move to authorize Barton and Laguadis to submit 2 grants for the total amount of
$1,800.
$1,800.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anything else?
There's one more.
There's a Whitlaw.
Authorization
yes.
to use town property, Whitlaw Close. I move to authorize the use of town property for a block party on Whitlaw Close, April 23rd, 2022, from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.